In at 10, the Night of Lightning. The gates are sealed. The attackers have retreated, mostly. There are a few stragglers left who wish to see their kingdom burn. They think they can be a hero. They think they'll save their kingdom. Pathetic. Their kingdom is ours and shall remain as such for eternity. The storms here are common, even more common than a battle in a tavern. However, the wonder of this village is at its end. We've had fun, but I think it's time to take another, and begin our reign over the regions. We have Unova, now time for another. Wait, why did the storm just get worse? Just as I think that, I see it. The darkest shadow one could ever think of flying over the clouds. It's as dark as Darkrai, but not him. I see a faint amount of blue shining through the clouds. It's almost like a god. And then you hear it. You have lost your way. Return to your righteous path or face annihilation. It's as if it just spoke to our brains. We look at each other and everyone else heard the same. We will fill this land with our righteous fury, I cry at the beast. That was the wrong idea. It started. The lightning. It came down as if on its own, with the fury of 100,000 men. Every time a bolt vanished, another one came down, as if God had started to eviscerate the human race. However, all around us, the world was normal. It was a bright and sunny day, but not over us. As my men fell, I see him descend. Zekrom. And at 9, demise. It's only happened once, the evisceration of the Kalos region. It happened oh so long ago that I don't even think the elders remember, but I do. I am not like most elders. I am AZ, and I remembered when the legendary Pokemon Yveltal finished its first life cycle. It's unknown when it was born or created, but when it was finished with this mortal plane, it didn't go quietly. The destruction was vast, and the casualties greater than even the Pokemon War which occurred after. Kalos, the region which this Pokemon called home, was destroyed, leveled by what can only be described as a catastrophic event. The death of this Pokemon sucked the life out of the region, as if the region sacrificed itself in order to preserve the Pokemon. Yveltal was saved and created a cocoon of sorts that acted as a shield for the coming few thousand years, until one group, known as Team Flare, decided that disturbing the Pokemon that caused the end of the region was a good idea. Of course, they didn't know about the evisceration, they only thought those were stories, but alas, I wait for the destruction of the region once more. And if Yveltal won't do it, I'll do it myself. If you guys are enjoying the video, be sure that you hit that like button because it really helps us out and lets us know what you want to see more of. Thanks. And at 8, Quake. The ground shook beneath my very feet. This wasn't uncommon for Hoenn. Thanks to the legends, however, it always made us worry that the legendary Groudon would rise again. The ground trembles once more. This is more than just an ordinary aftershock. Something's wrong. I rush outside and see the storm forming. It's like the old legend. I grab my coat and head to the den, where there are officers set up preventing entry. I guess this is no mere storm, and the legend is true. The legendaries Groudon and Kyogre will rise again. They start evacuating once they hear the roar. The sound is amplified because of the cave, and then we hear another roar coming from behind us in the ocean. They usher us out of the city, leaving behind everything we own, and getting as many as possible onto Route 24. For a minute, the downpour stops. This makes people think that it's safe, and despite the police doing their best to hold them back, a man begins to return to his home. That's when Groudon bursts out of the ground, dropping a boulder on him. That's the day we left Reptile City, and the last day that it was left standing. And at 7, Hoopa. Hoopa and I were friends. I thought we were best buds. There's no words to describe the kind of connection we had. That's until I died, at least. In the Pokemon world, some kids who die end up turning into Pokemon. I myself got lost in the woods while out on a walk with Hoopa, so I ended up becoming a Phantom. If I was a Kadabra, I'd be able to let Hoopa know who I am, but they can't understand a Phantom. After I died though, Hoopa kinda lost it. It changed to its unbound form since it was no longer by my side and terrorized as many people as possible, even some of the search parties for me. I'm starting to worry about what it will do next, and if they ever cared about me in the first place, or if it knew what would happen in that forest. It's been 10 years now, and Hoopa is with another boy. They came back into my forest. You'd think that Hoopa would avoid that since what happened last time, but then I see it smirk. It knows what's about to happen. Hoopa quickly opens a wormhole and heads through, but not before looking at me, now a Trevenant, and winking. And at 6, goodnight. I used to have trouble sleeping. I tried all that I could, sleeping pills, NyQuil, more pills. I even tried Pokemon, but even Jigglypuff couldn't put me to sleep. But then I found her, Meloetta. Meloetta is like my soulmate. We work together in harmony. She helps put me to sleep, and I help her with her mission. Everyone is sound asleep now. They were all having such a hard time. With the sun out, it's nearly impossible to sleep. But now, they can all sleep for as long as they want. Meloetta helps me sleep. She sings to me. It's like everything is a dream. Such a perfect life. Singing and sleeping is essentially the life of my dreams. Halfway through number 5, Pokemon. Pokemon is so addictive. It's like the most illicit substance on the planet, but it's legal. It's like PETA and the devil had a baby and then they turned it into a reality. I have plenty of Pokemon. I can't always keep them in their ball, but whenever they're out, they seem happy. They love to go outside and run around in the backyard. Luckily, I don't have any flying types, otherwise they might fly away. My parents think I have too many Pokemon, but you gotta catch them all, right? Even Pokemon Control thinks I have too many. They keep trying to take them away, but whenever they do, I go back, get my Pokemon back, and grab another one while I'm at it too. It's like Pokemon Control is Team Rocket and I'm Ash. I tried putting a Pokemon in my PC a while ago, but it didn't work. It just started smelling funny, so I threw it out. Pokemon Control can take that one. My parents seem concerned, but can't they just see that I'm having fun with my life? Gotta catch them all. And then 4, the fire. It was late. Probably around 2 in the morning. The thunder was cracking, the lightning was flashing blue, and we saw a figure fly overhead. When it flew over the brass tower, that's when it caught. The fire spread quickly, despite the rain we thought would prevent it. My dear friends were inside, Sparky, Rainer, and Pyro. They loved to play in that tower, jump from post to post, battling and training themselves just for fun. I never thought it was an issue. But when the fire spread down, they were goners. Rainer tried to protect them. Sparky even took a lightning bolt for them, but nothing worked. Even Pyro stood in the flames and tried to absorb them. Nothing. Luckily, Ho-Oh had a spot for them in his plane, and now whenever I see one of the legendary beasts, I smile and shed a tear for the boys I lost oh so long ago. Perhaps, after the plug is pulled, I'll be with them once more. And at 3, Genesect. Genesect? More like genocide. That monster is unstable and should be put in the Pokemon graveyard with the others. They were already temperamental to begin with, but their leader, the Red Genesect, is ruthless. He's the one who started the original Pokemon War. The one that claimed the lives of millions of Pokemon. The Pokemon who put their lives on the line should be the ones who remain, not these goddamn unhinged monstrosities. They've nearly leveled all of Castelia City at this point. The psychopathic group led by their leader won't let any human live. I've managed to hide inside the debris of one of the buildings, but the moment they suspect something, I believe it will be the end. They don't seem to speak aloud, not even saying their name. I'm guessing it's some form of psychic communication, or something of the electronic equivalent, since they look like machines. Oh no. While writing that last line, I moved a piece of wall, probably around the size of a medium rock, but that was enough for the Genesect to hear. And at 2, framed. Officer, I swear I didn't do it. I wasn't even in Nimbasa City last week. I've been in Castelia City for the past month doing my research. What, filling up that Pokedex? You seem to have the Pokemon that appear after Mistralton, which means you have to have had passed through Nimbasa. Why would you go back? Because I missed stuff. Come on, there has to be an explanation for this. There is. You did it. We caught you on the cameras, you monster. What do you mean, monster? Here, look at this and then tell me that's not you. It may look like me, but it's not. What do you think, Arceus just created another version of you to tear that old man apart? No, it wouldn't have been Arceus. What about the unknown? They were safe in Relic Castle. What about the Weather Trio? Unaccounted for, but we know it's not them. How? They don't have this kind of ability. What about a Ditto? A Ditto wouldn't be able to do that to a human. This was animalistic. How do you not remember? What if it was Zoroark? We hadn't considered that. Well, we can't have you blabbing now, can we? The illusion fades as Zoroark steps out from the shadows and reveals the bloody stained claws of the one, the only, Arceus. Finally, in number 1, Dream of Darkness. It started as sleep paralysis. It's a fairly common phenomenon, at least for me, when your mind wakes up but your body doesn't, and you're conscious and can see around you but can't move. Some people also have a blind spot while this happens, and most people believe it to be their sleep paralysis demon, since it can look like a person, but mine didn't. Mine looked odd. It had legs, but they were long and pointed. The arms were similar in a way, with wide hands thicker than a bowl of oatmeal. It had what looked like smoke coming off its shoulders, and the hair was similar. It stood there staring at me, like most sleep paralysis demons do, but then it started moving. It reached out a hand, and I watched it grab my face, as if trying to wake me up, but instead I fell back asleep. It fades to black and I'm back in my room. The demon is gone and I can finally move. It's still dark out, but my clock says 11 a.m. Concerned, I walk down the stairs and call out to my parents, asking them what's going on. They say nothing, so instead I call out to my sister. Nothing again. When I get down, I see why they didn't call. They were what can only be described as spread out across the room. The ceilings and walls were red and their heads were all removed. I close my eyes and I'm back in my room. The demon is gone and I can finally move. It's still dark out, but my clock says 11 a.m.
Coming in at number 10, The Shadow. This creepypasta is about a gamer who believes Pokemon are stalking him in real life. After his older brother died, he left behind a lot of his old games, and our protagonist decides to play some of the Pokemon games and even continues from where his brother left off. He notices something a bit weird though. All of the Pokemon in the wild that he came across were Gengars, and when entering into battle with one of them, his Pokemon looked absolutely frightened. He continued anyways, and when trying to catch the wild Pokemon, it failed. Except oddly, a message appeared on the screen that said, "Leave now or suffer." Creeped out by this, he shut off the Game Boy to try to get some rest. And as he was trying to fall asleep, he could hear a demonic laugh coming from the Game Boy. Just as he was about to get up to check it, he saw big glowing red eyes and a shiny white smirk in the shadows of his room. Terrified, he closed his eyes and ran to turn on the lights, but before he could reach them, he tripped, breaking his ankle in the process. That's when he sees his Game Boy light up and a text box appear beside a Gengar that just said,
"I guess you chose suffer."
Number 9, Abandoned Pokédoll. This Pokemon Creepypasta is an interesting take on what happens when a once beloved Pokédoll gets left behind. It felt like if Toy Story 3 was a horror movie. The story begins simple enough from the doll's perspective of loving its owner and how it was its favorite doll. And as time passed, it became forgotten and was eventually thrown in the trash. That's when the story takes its dark turn. The doll actually comes to life and seeks out its previous owner. When it arrives at the house where it once resided, it finds a ton of new dolls scattered around the room. It then goes on a rampage, destroying the other dolls and eventually slitting the throat of its previous owner. Number 8, Let Me Serve You. This creepypasta is about a Pokemon event that happened where gamers were given the opportunity to have the Mew character as part of their new event release. The gamer decides to level up the rest of his Pokemon before using Mew, but for some reason, Mew keeps jumping into battle. Even after moving him to the bottom spot several times, he continuously replaces the first Pokemon with a text box appearing that just says, "Mew wants to battle." Another creepy part was that no matter what he tried, Mew would always say, "I want to serve you, let me serve you." Now, our protagonist was terrified when he restarted his game to find that all of his Pokemon were dead, and their sprites were gray with a red X over the photo. When he tries to leave Mew in a Pokemon Center, his sprite looks angry, and another text box appears that says, "You can't get rid of me," followed by Mew playing the death song. This let out a terrible screeching noise, causing the gamer to black out and wake up in his bed. Believing it was all just a horrible nightmare, he picks up the Game Boy to play again, only to be met with a text box next to Mew that said, "Welcome back, let me serve you." And at number 7, Will I Ever Be Free? This creepypasta is a short, sad, and creepy origin story for the Pokemon known as Yamask. It tells the tale of a Yamask who rested well as a ghost inside of an ancient tomb, only to be tormented by its rebirth. It could remember its past life, even stating that the Pokemon was once human. It despises its new creature-like form that lurks through the night and claims that all it has left is its mask, the mask that represents its face from a past life. It's disgusted by its new life as a ghostly devil that gives its trainer immense power. The author then ends the story tragically with the last line being, "My face was once so beautiful. All I could do was stare at the mask and weep silently to myself.
I could never be free."
In at number 6, You Will Join Us. This creepypasta is about a gamer who loved playing Pokemon Gold and worked so hard to build his team up. When his battery drained, he ended up losing all of his saves. And as a result, he moved on to the newer versions of Pokemon, but when Pokemon Heart Gold was released, he was excited to replay a familiar region. And when he starts the game, Professor Elm greets him by name, except he says welcome back. This was odd, but he continued. He would then say, "They're waiting for you." At this point, he loses control of his character and is now teleported to Lavender Town, where he sees 6 gravestones, all of which had his Pokemon Gold teammates' names written on them. They rose from the graves, except in a more pixelated Game Boy Color version, each one confronting the player that he had forgotten them and left them behind. Then one addressed him by name, saying,
"We are yours, so if you will not permit us to join you, you will join us.
Immediately after that, his sprite began doing the dig animation, causing the screen to go completely dark. In at number 5, Loss of Purpose. This heartbreaking creepypasta is about the characters in the Pokemon game and what happens when they're left behind. Our protagonist picked up an old copy of Pokemon Red, but noticed that after every trainer or enemy he defeated, they would just say, "Now I shall stand forgotten." This creepy message was alluding to the fact that once you move on in the game, they remain in place with no real use. Eventually our gamer comes into an odd battle with himself. After losing the battle, the enemy then says,
Your purpose has been served. End it all before you exist alone forever.
and when he tried to start a new game, he would only get a message that read,
The dead do not return.
It wasn't until that message that our protagonist realizes the character's fear of a loss of purpose. In at number 4, Whole Again. This creepypasta is about a gamer who was playing Pokemon Black and wished to capture a rare dragon Pokemon that was said to be lurking in the caves. And although along the way he was faced with many creepy signs that warn the dragon needs flesh to survive and to become whole again, he kept seeing this whole again phrasing everywhere he went. He wouldn't come to realize its meaning until he finally battled the mysterious Pokemon. And while in battle, when one of his Pokemon would faint, a piece of them would then now be attached to the enemy's sprite, thus making him whole again. Number 3, The Truth Hurts. This strange occurrence happened when a gamer was playing Pokemon Black and was faced with a creepy as hell Pokemon. When he gets to the final showdown with N, he's faced first with a battle against a wild Reshiram. He knew that his Pokemon weren't adequate enough to defeat this enemy, so he chose to run instead. But to his surprise, a text box just came up that said, "Would you like to give a nickname to Reshiram?" Confused by this, he just names it Truth. And then it was added to his party. Following this, a cutscene showed Reshiram killing N and then using his blood to write the words "Truth hurts, doesn't it?" In at number 2, It's Just a Game. This creepypasta is about a gamer who comes across strange shape-shifting Pokemon. And at one point she believes she sees a Clefairy until it suddenly changes into a Gengar. And then the Gengar just lets out an evil laugh before disappearing. Then, while in the rock tunnel, she's confronted by another Pokemon who at first appears to be an Onix that soon changes to jet black with glowing red eyes. Fully believing at this point that she may have purchased a hack copy of the game, she continues on to see what else it offers. The dark turn happens when she's faced against an unknown trainer named Aaron, who shockingly resembles her best friend Aaron in real life. And when the battle begins, Aaron first uses a Gengar, and then an all-black Onix, and then her final Pokemon was the Buried Alive character. That's when the Aaron character begins to decay like the Buried Alive character, and as the screen flashed red, she threw her Game Boy aside to call her friend. Her friend Aaron tries to calm her down, saying it's just a game. So once she's calm, she returns to the Game Boy to see the Aaron trainer on the screen, facing her, with the text box that said,
It's just a game, right?
Lastly at number 1, Life Force. This creepy tale is about a sinister Litwick. A trainer and her Pokemon were traveling through a dark cave when they saw a flickering light in the distance. The Litwick approached and agreed to help guide them through the tunnel. What they didn't know was that Litwick would be slowly draining the energy from her Pokemon. And when her Dewott finally fainted and died, she desperately tried to reach for a Pokeball to assist her, but Litwick wasn't having any of that. The Pokemon then knocked her down onto the ground, and as her energy was rapidly fading, a text box appeared on the screen that said,
Death shines like a candle.
And in at number 10, Battery Ditto. This creepypasta was written by an unknown author on the Creepypasta wiki page. It's a story about how Team Rocket was experimenting on Dittos, using several of them to try to create a new Pokemon. They would keep them in cramped cages wired with electricity, and if they ever made a peep, they would be shocked almost to death. One night a security guard was falling asleep, so he released his Arcanine to watch over them. When he woke up from a loud scream, he discovered that a Ditto had bred with the Arcanine. After several weeks of the Ditto not changing back to its original shape, the dark looking Arcanine gave birth to an egg. When the egg finally hatched, it was a Pokemon that they then called Houndour. With this new discovery of birthing Pokemon, Team Rocket rapidly began trying to replicate the process, torturing the Dittos as they went through it. And while some results were successful, most led to the death of many Pokemon. Word traveled fast, and soon the lab was destroyed, releasing all of the trapped Dittos and the newly created Pokemon. However, this did not stop Team Rocket. They continued torturing any Ditto that they could find, and still, to this day, are attempting to manipulate them. There is no end to the mutations that they can force on those poor battery Dittos. And at number 9, Mewtwo. This creepypasta story is based on an original tale found on tumblr.com. It's about a gamer who picks up a copy of Pokemon Blue, and when he begins playing, a Mewtwo starts stalking him. Every time he entered into the grass, he would be thrown into a battle with a level 70 Mewtwo. And at the time, all of his Pokemon had very low levels, so sure enough, the Mewtwo made quick work of his party. However, the strange thing was that when Mewtwo defeated one of his Pokemon, they were completely wiped from his party. He continued to reset his device, but nothing worked. They were all still gone. Oddly, upon restarting, the Mew glitch occurred when the gamer managed to make it to Lavender Town without running into the Mewtwo. This glitch would keep Mew in your party no matter what. And when he inevitably ran into the Mewtwo again, his party was wiped out, leaving only the Mew to face him. When both were down to just a sliver of health, the Mew used Explosion, causing both Pokemon to faint and the screen to go black. Upon restarting, the Mewtwo was there and with a text that read, "What have I become?" It then used Struggle on itself, resulting in a Pokeball containing Sacred Ash to remain in its place. The gamer used this to revive his once defeated party and would come to the revelation that maybe Mewtwo isn't just a monster, but a Pokemon with a compassionate heart after all. In at number 8, Mount Silver. This is a creepy yet somehow touching story about the ghost of your rival in the first Pokemon games. It's known that years before you meet Professor Oak, he trained your rival Red to reach Mount Silver. What's unknown is that once Red was there, he was never heard from again, and upon failed attempts at contacting him, Professor Oak travels to Mount Silver to discover that Red has died. What he sees though is the spirit of Red, and his ghost simply utters, "Help me." Oak knew that he needed to find a trainer worthy enough to make it to Mount Silver in order to free the spirit of Red. The Elite Four are positioned strategically as your last test to prove your worthiness as a trainer. When you finally meet Red at Mount Silver, he's surprised to see you, and with no words exchanged, a battle of epic proportions ensues. When you have won the battle, Red says nothing, and before disappearing from your view, he has a faint smile, almost to say, "Thank you." Number 7, Here Lies Giovanni. This creepypasta is based on a story called Colorblind found on the Creepypasta wiki page. It's a tale of a gamer who falls deep into a hack copy of Pokemon Yellow. In the game, the main character is named Dane and he has a Pikachu named Laddie. The gamer finds out that this storyline is much different than he's ever played. It follows Dane, Laddie, and another traveler named Delia, who travels with them throughout the game. And after becoming somewhat famous for his successes in battles, he's asked to become the gym leader for Viridian City. He then hears a snap and his game shuts off. But when he restarts it, a text box appears that says 1 year later. His sprite is different. He's now the gym leader, but his Pikachu is missing. The gamer soon comes to realize that Laddie had passed away in the year that Dane was the gym leader. He has one last interaction with his old friend Delia, who doesn't want anything to do with him after his neglect led to the loss of Laddie. He gives her his mother's old house in Pallet Town and decides that it's best if they just part ways. Then, once again, the game clicks and shuts off. And when the gamer restarts, Dane's sprite is now wearing a striped suit and has much more defined, mature features. The game takes over in cinematic fashion and brings Dane to the Pokemon Tower. He says one last goodbye to Laddie, and a text box appears that says, "I will never find another you, but a Pikachu I will find. I will form an organization to purge Kanto for me. I came as Dane, but I will leave as another." The sprite walks along the tombstones, stopping at one, where a text box appears that says, "I must find a name appropriate to depart with." The tombstone just reads, "Here lies Giovanni." Number 6, Nightmare's Revenge. In this creepypasta story from the wiki page, a gamer has an evil encounter with a rogue Gengar. He first comes across the Pokemon in the wild, and when he catches it, he names it Nightmare. And after regular life events took over, the gamer never really had time to play his Pokemon Soul Silver. And when he finally picked it back up, the Gengar was no longer in his party. And in front of him was his rival curled up in a pool of blood, barely alive. With his last words he said, "Ethan, a Gengar attacked me." He said something about finding a guy named Red. "Here, take this." What he gave him was a crucifix of some kind. And after tracking down the Gengar, he battled with him, except the Gengar somehow knew the gamer's real name. He said, "Tell me, Ben, do you still care about me?" Ben answered by just hitting the yes option, but Nightmare didn't care. He wiped out Ben's Pokemon, and with only his sprite left on the screen, Ben remembered the crucifix. He used that, and then the Gengar sprite appeared shocked as it sunk into the ground, leaving a text box that said, "Nightmare has died." And as the credits rolled and Ben in complete shock, he was about to shut off his Game Boy when Nightmare's red eyes filled the screen and a demonic voice said,
I wouldn't celebrate so soon, Ben. For as long as you live, I will haunt you.
Number 5, Divulging into Madness. This next creepypasta story is about the brainwashing that Pokemon had on the brain of a young girl. Her parents bought her a Pokemon game to fit in with her new friends at school, but what they didn't see coming was how isolated it actually made her. She was obsessed with it, and only took her eyes off the screen while sleeping. And one night the parents snuck into her room to see what was so appealing about the game. They discovered that she had only been playing for 13 hours, but that didn't make any sense because since buying her the game months ago, she never put it down. And when the little girl wakes up, she starts her Pokemon game, but from this perspective, we see that the game has been talking to her. And the character Red told the little girl about her parents sneaking into the room to play the game, and that they needed to be taken care of. Obsessed with the game, she obeyed, and when her parents greeted her in the kitchen, she grabbed the knife from the drawer, and as the game instructed her, "Good girl, now finish him," she quickly slits her father's throat, and with her mother in disbelief, she desperately tries to convince her daughter to drop the knife and the Game Boy in her other hand.
Red then says, "Now darling, don't listen. She wants to take me again, and who knows what she'll do."
With her mother now trying to run away, the girl throws the knife, hitting her mother in the back. Red then says, "Your suffering ends now. Now we can be friends forever." In at number 4, Tick, Tick, Tick. This creepypasta story is about why beating Pokemon may not be such a good idea. Our protagonist plays his way through the game, and after every gym leader he defeats, they all say the same thing. Tick, tick, tick. He is waiting. Every single time they say that. Before he is about to face Red at Mount Silver, his sprite says, "For the sake of you and me, the ticking needs to continue." He ignored the message and decided to find out exactly why the trainers were warning him of Red. And when he defeats Red, a text box appears saying, "Tick, tick, boom." And just as the gamer is reading the word boom, his Game Boy sends a jolt of electricity, shocking him so much that he drops the game. And when he picks it up, the save file is corrupted. That's when he pieces together his character's last message. When you defeat Red, there is nothing. The ticking was leading him to that. As long as Red was undefeated, everyone in the game would still exist. Beat the game, and you destroy their world. Hence his character saying, "For the sake of you and me, the ticking needs to continue." Oddly, he can still hear the subtle ticking noise wherever he goes. Even with a digital clock, he hears tick, tick, tick. Number 3, Ghost Marowak. This story is based on a creepypasta from the wiki page and, like most others, has an unknown author. I wish I could give credit, but it's not there. But it's about a gamer who managed to catch a ghost Marowak by using a hack of infinite Master Balls. Amazingly, Marowak stayed in his party but was simply classified as a regular Marowak. However, the consequences were worse than he thought. With the ghost Marowak now in his party, the gamer lost everything. All of his previously caught Pokemon, every TM, every HM, everything. Anytime that he would enter into the grass, he would always come into battle with a Cubo. Every time. He restarted the game with hopes of it fixing his mistake of choosing to cheat the game. But when he started, his sprite was now replaced by the ghost Marowak. And every time he hits any button, the poor Marowak lets out a cry that will haunt him forever. In at number 2, Poor Rival. This creepypasta is more of a history lesson on your rival, but it still remains something to consider when playing the game that may creep you out. When you meet your rival in Lavender Town, he's actually there to lay his fallen Raticate to rest. The one Pokemon that you actually defeated in your last meeting. Instead of blaming you for his loss, your rival channels his hatred for you into becoming the Indigo League champion. However, before he can do that, you beat him once again. And at the end, your poor rival is scolded by his grandfather while you receive the professor's praise. Throughout the game, you manage to crush your rival's innocence, crush his dreams, and steal away the love from his own grandfather. The author then ends the story by saying, maybe he's a ghost that can't leave, or just an orphan who lost his Raticate in a freak accident and can't stop thinking about it, and never leaving until death itself can rid of it. But that's how it goes. Or maybe it's just all in your head. Lastly, in our number 1 spot, Everything Dies. This creepypasta is based on a story by an author known as Flaky Porcupine. Great name. It's told from the perspective of a young Paris Pokemon, who at a young age lost its father. The Pokemon's mother would tell the young Paris that everything dies, sweetie, it's what we were born to do. Confused by this, it tries to lead a normal life in the woods, wrestling with other Pokemon, but with each day it can feel the parasites on its back growing and taking control of its body. And when it finally is captured by a trainer, to which it refers to as a two-legger, it continually hears the mentioning of the number 24. What that Paris doesn't know is that the trainers are talking about the level in which Paris evolves. And when it's experiencing its evolution, the trainer says it's okay, everything dies, which finally makes it understand what its mother was talking about. The author then describes the transformation by saying, "My body suddenly glows in an intense white that would blind one's eyes before I too become just like my brethren around me. It felt great pain, that of 1,000 knives piercing its body. The last thing it hears is congratulations, your Paris evolved into a Parasect." And number 10 is Lavender Town Syndrome. This turn of phrase, also known as Lavender Town Tone or Lavender Town Suicides, is extremely shocking to learn about. Back in February of 1996, when Pokemon Red and Green were released in Japan, they experienced a number of suicides and illness in children between the ages of 7 and 12. Apparently these suicides came from the high frequencies that were played in the theme music of Lavender Town, and it's rumored that at least 200 children committed suicide, with many others developing illnesses and afflictions. It's known that children have very sensitive hearing, so the developers soon changed the tone of Lavender Town. And to study this phenomenon, the developers created a software to analyze this audio. But when it played, it creates images of the unknown, a character in the game Pokemon. This is a terrifying revelation because that character didn't even appear until later games, and is said to translate to "leave now." Number 9. Buried Alive. There are a ton of hacked Pokemon games out there, but this one was actually an intended original script for the game known as the Berryman script. It was initially meant to be a boss, but I believe it was just too freaky for players, especially considering their demographic. And in a battle view mode, the Buried Alive character looks like a decaying human corpse, and if you happen to lose the battle, the Berryman will say, "Finally, fresh meat." Then he would drag your player into the ground. Following that, the typical game over screen would appear, but in the background, you can see the Buried Alive character devouring your player. Then suddenly, this creepy soundtrack and animation called Static Mesh would appear. Followed by this disturbing message. What is that even supposed to mean? Like, it's also believed that it may have a similar effect to the Lavender Tone that I mentioned before. Number 8, Pokemon Lost Silver. After buying a used Pokemon Silver game, this player was weirded out to find the game they continued into from the previous player had 999 hours put into the game, all 16 badges and 99,999 Pokedollars and all 251 Pokemon in the Pokedex. The only Pokemon in the player's arsenal were unknowns that spelled out the word leave, and a Cyndaquil named Hurry. After landing in a dark cave, the player used Cyndaquil's flash to see and soon regretted what they saw. The walls were covered in blood red. The player landed in a new dark room and again tried to use the flash, but then it just said Hurry has fainted. And the unknowns now spelt out the word he died. Now his character was white with bloody tears coming from his eyes. Plus his badge count kept changing. First to 24, then to 32. The unknowns now spelled dying. After engaging in a battle with a Pikachu, his Pokemon didn't say fainted, it said it had died. Then the Pikachu also died. The character even comes across the Pokemon Gold sprite that says goodbye forever. He then appears in a small room filled with graves, and all the gym leaders at the bottom were replaced with skulls. The unknowns then spelled I'm dead. A final text came up on the screen that read RIP, and the player could not escape, no matter what they pressed. It seemed as though this hacked copy was telling a story of a young trainer who, despite his efforts in becoming a Pokemon master, still couldn't avoid death and being forgotten by the next generation. Number 7, Trapped in a Cave. This creepypasta is more sad and disturbing than just scary, but still, it's a good one. It's a tale of a player who comes across a horrible sight in a cave. The only light seemed to be coming from the tail of a Charizard named Ruby. Ruby was with her trainer, but something was wrong. The trainer was missing his arm and both legs. Ruby appeared to be sad and afraid. The trainer repeatedly kept asking the Charizard if it was hungry, but Ruby denied, but its rumbling stomach told another story. The man insisted, eventually placed his arm in between Ruby's fangs. Eventually, the Charizard closed its eyes and bit off his arm, leaving only a head and torso. Eventually, the trainer falls asleep and the Charizard keeps crying. and crying, as if it knew what was going to happen next when it got hungry. Number 6. Abandoned Loneliness. This creepypasta revolves around a hack copy of Leaf Green, given to a friend, and begins with an EV called Loneliness, except the E in Loneliness is missing for some reason. And at the beginning, the player's name is Leaf, and follows a number of very strange events and signs that take place in an area called Emptiness, not Pallet Town. After exploring, the player notices that this town is filled with these NPCs that appear to look like ghosts with blood coming from their eyes. The ghosts constantly give strange and evil advice to the character as they progress through the game. As fog covers most of the landscape, the player notices the tiles on the ground spelling out cryptic messages. One of the ghosts even says, "Can't you do better?" The signs and ghosts continue to warn of a friend who betrayed Loneliness. Leaf even sees the game's rival Blue pleading to not believe the ghosts and to run before they get you. The player finds out that Blue abandoned Loneliness, and after several creepy messages, including one from Brock who said the ghost tricked him, the player shuts off his game. Months later, he picks it back up again, but everything is different. His character is called Sorrow, and his Eevee is a different Pokemon named Unwanted. He eventually enters into a battle with a wild Eevee named Loneliness, and when he defeats it, the player turns into one of those ghosts, and is now said to be cursed as well. Suddenly, he's in Pallet Town again, where Red and Blue say that Leaf got the brunt of the curse. He interacts with a signpost nearby, and it just says, "Loneliness was put to rest, RIP. Number 5. Disabled. So far, a lot of these creepy things coming from the Pokemon series have a lot to do with strange sounds or frequencies, and this one's no different. Our player in this story was absolutely in love with two characters, Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff. When she buys Pokemon Soul Silver, she immediately sets out to capture a Jigglypuff. This takes some time though, but eventually she manages to catch one in the Safari Zone. No matter how high she leveled her new Jigglypuff, she always kept her sing attack because, well, she loved to hum along to the tune. Still set on getting her second favorite Wigglytuff, but understanding how difficult it was to even find Jigglypuff, she decides to put a high level Pokemon on the wireless trade board in hopes of someone trading a Wigglytuff. And well, she gets her wish, and someone trades her, but oddly the Pokemon is called Disabled in all caps. It has one move, Sing. Before entering into a battle with her new Pokemon, she loads up a couple TMs like Hidden Power, Swagger, and Explosion. She enters into a battle with her new Wigglytuff, but for some reason, Sing is disabled. She tries using Hidden Power for Wig, but it fails. She tries to run, but it fails. The words "wants to fight" comes up on the screen. Then, it gets weirder. Wigglytuff begins doing its own actions. Repeatedly, she sees "disabled" try to use Sing. Sing was disabled. Again and again and again this happens. The enemy suddenly appears sick, as if poisoned, and then flees from battle. But Wig doesn't stop. The text box fills the screen. Disabled use struggle. It struggled. Then more, saying, "Why can't I sing? Sing. Sing." The word "sing" now is flooding the screen. Then randomly an option appears saying, "Can you sing? Yes or no?" The player hits no several times, and suddenly the speakers let out a large, loud screeching noise, causing the player to drop her DS. Having enough of this weirdness, she tries trading the Wigglytuff, and when a trade appears, she hits yes several times, begging for it to hurry. When the trade goes through, it was for a Cyndaquil. Its name was Hurry. Number 4. Strangled Red. This creepy hacked game of Pokemon Red was found in a trash bin of all places, and it tells the story of a trainer named Steven and his best friend, a Charizard named Miki. Oddly, when the player starts up the screen, it just reads Pokemon Strangled Red version. Realizing it was a hacked game, he plays anyways. Although, it won't let him continue with the previous player's game, so he hits new game. The player's name was automatically set to Steven. He starts with a single Charmander named Miki, and everything about this game was just a bit different. His character had a smirk and long hair, his rival was actually his brother, and the starter bedroom had 2 of everything. The game played normally, just the storyline was different. Using the Charmander, it quickly evolved into a Charizard by level 25. As soon as the player reached Lavender Town, things started to get weird. He entered into a battle with his brother Blue, and once they were successful, they had a dialogue back and forth at the house that was strange for a solo game. The NPC wanted Steven to trade him his Charizard Miki. After the no button wouldn't work, he reluctantly hit yes. That's when the game froze mid-trade. He turned it off, and when he restarted, the only option was continue, except he didn't have the Charizard and was greeted with a text box that read 1 year later. When he checked his menu, the character was different. Its eyes were blank, the smirk was gone, and his long hair looked messy. Also, Miki was dead. the player pieced together that this character named Steven is actually the previous champion that then becomes your rival in other games. The town seemed to mourn his loss, with almost presenting him with compassion for this disturbed character. And at this point the game takes over, so the player takes Steven to Lavender Town, where all of the NPC trainers seem to ignore him completely, all saying, just go. Sometimes dead is best. To read the full story though, and ending as well, look up Pokemon Strangled Red. It's far too gruesome for me to continue from there. Number 3. Braid. This is a creepypasta that is great if you're looking for a good Halloween story to read. It occurs around Ilex Forest and is told in 3 separate narratives that come together to create an unsettling atmosphere. Standing between the player and Goldenrod City, they know they have to enter the forest. An old tale about the history of Ilex Forest involves villagers bringing baskets of food to the edge of the forest, and we learn that it is left there for a witch in exchange of fruitful harvests each year. However, we learn that if they look at the witch while she is using her magic, the blessing will become a curse. This tremendous creepypasta also goes into detail about the leader of the nearby town's daughter and her curiosity leading her to a curse from the witch, trapping her in the forest and thus becoming the voice of the forest. That's why when you enter Ilex Forest, you're warned, and even the trees seem to be weeping and moaning, just watching as the witch turns each new helpless child into a gift to the voice of the forest. Number 2. Best Friends Forever. As much as I enjoy the hacked games and the dramatic stories that people tell using Pokemon locations, this one is especially freaky. It's a tale of a girl and her best friend. That friend was a Torchic named Blue. The player would always play with her real life friend Talia, but when Talia said that she didn't want to be friends with her anymore, the player just transfers that companionship to her Pokemon characters. Playing night and day, one day Talia snatched her Game Boy out of her hand and threw it to the ground, and was about to crush it with her foot before the game just lets out a loud screeching noise. Talia turns pale and runs away, and her friend Blue's stats also change as well, from likes to sleep to angry. And after moving on to new Pokemon games, the player said goodbye to her old friends and started anew with a Mudkip named Red. As she continued to buy new games, she would bring over her best players from previous versions until she remembered she forgot about her old friend Blue. When starting up her old Pokemon Ruby game, a strange message came on the screen that just said, "You promised you wouldn't replace me." This is where it gets weird. Then she begins having a conversation with Blue, where the Pokemon is responding on the screen to everything she says. Then Blue asks if Talia is still mean to her, even saying that it got very angry. The player decides to carry Blue over to the new game, but first, she's asked by her mother to pick up a pie pan that she lent to Talia's mother. The girl runs over to Talia's home, but there's no answer. And when she hears a scream, she runs into the house to find Talia with burn marks all over her body and a knife in her neck. Her parents were also hung in the basement. She finds Talia's little brother hiding, who tells her that they were just watching TV when a loud beeping noise went off, and Talia was just dead. She rushes home, and on her DS is a text from Blue saying, "She was mean to you. She deserved it." She wakes up around 3 AM to a beeping noise similar to the one Talia's brother heard, and it's Blue. All of her Pokemon begin disappearing, and a text appears, "Now we can be best friends forever." Suddenly she wakes up in her bedroom, but she doesn't recognize anything. She runs downstairs to see a lady she doesn't know, and the woman turns and says, "Good morning, honey. You're finally awake. Our neighbor Professor Birch is anxious to meet you." Number 1. Pokemon Black. This is an infamous hacked version of Pokemon. It begins normally, except with a 4th option for a Pokemon being Ghost. If the player selects Ghost, it starts at a level 1, and is only capable of one move, Curse. When the player uses Curse in battle, the screen cuts to black and only cries of their enemy can be heard. Then, when they return, the Pokemon is gone. When they fought against a trainer, the same thing would happen, except each defeat meant a loss of their Pokeball. And once they were gone, the player could actually use Curse on the trainer. This would replace the character with a tombstone. And after defeating the Elite Four, the game changes again, and a text appears many years later. At this point, where all of these stories begin to get creepy, the player ends up in Lavender Town, except this time as an elderly man, standing in front of tombstones. In this post-game world, it's just void of any NPCs, with only tombstones where they used to be. When returning to where they started the game, the player learns that every living thing was dead because the player and Ghost had cursed them. Finally, the Ghost character appears, but this time, it's against your player. The old man character only has one move, and it's Struggle. Until almost having no health, the Ghost uses Curse for one last time, attacking the player. The screen then fades to black, and upon rebooting it, the game file was erased.
Starting us off in at number 5, Pokemon Cursed Forever. Cursed Forever's creepypasta is as follows. The narrator begins their tale by stating they've always loved Pokemon, specifically the first 3 Game Boy titles, Red, Blue, and Yellow. Hating emulators, they managed to find a copy of Pokemon Yellow in an old Game Boy Color to play it on. After he bought them and returned home, he attempted to play the game. Immediately though, he realized that the title lacked sound. Assuming the cartridge was a little glitchy, he wasn't surprised when the music kicked in at the main title screen, and that Pikachu, who appears on the title screen, was missing his eyes. When Professor Oak appeared, his head and arms were missing. When our narrator decided to test out the previous game saved on the cartridge, it got even weirder. Pikachu's special emotion window appeared and the electric Pokemon looked incredibly solemn. Then the game continued in Professor Oak's lab. Pallet Town was not like how our narrator remembered it to be. It was entirely deserted with only himself and the lab remaining. Walking north of the town in the tall grass brought forth more surprises. The grass was populated by Pokemon who should not have been there, like Gengars and Alakazams and Cubones. The only option that appeared when he'd get into a battle was run. Eventually the player got to Viridian City, which was severely glitched. The only building they could enter was the Poke Center, which looked demented on the inside. Nurse Joy was gone, but her Chansey was still there, who let out a deranged cry. And then a battle began between Chansey and the player. The only option available again was to run, but this time they couldn't escape. The Chansey then used an attack called a Cack-Ip. That's Pikachu spelled backwards, which is also, by the way, very difficult to say. Chansey then fainted. All of a sudden another Pokemon, an evil looking Pikachu sprite appeared and a new battle began. Now, the player sprite had an HP bar, and the battle ensued. Long story short, a Cack-Ip wins the battle. And when the player returned to Viridian City, everything was even more demented, and text boxes appeared declaring that the player had caught a Cack-Ip. Eventually a screen appears on the player's Game Boy that reads, "Cursed Forever," and no matter what he did, what button he pressed, that screen would not go away, except for when he turned the Game Boy off. So, does this sound intriguing to you? Well, it has been adapted into a game that you can download online at GameJolt.com and play. Not an ad for them, they're just the place where you can get it. And at number 4, the original Pokemon Red and Blue, Lavender Town Syndrome. So this one is a bit of an exception on our list. It's the reverse, a creepypasta spawned from the game that you can in fact play, although you likely won't find yourself getting deathly ill. So let's backtrack a sec. One of the most prominent Pokemon creepypastas is Lavender Town Syndrome. It's an urban legend that tells of how kids in Japan, after playing the initial Pokemon Red and Green games, it came out as Blue in North America FYI, a bunch of them got really ill, to the point where there was allegedly reported suicides. This was caused by a specific high-pitched frequency that can be only heard by the ears of younger individuals. The Lavender Town theme was said to have this frequency, and depending on the version of the tale that you were reading, it was either added in maliciously by a member of the design team working on the games for Game Freak, later taken out in releases of the titles afterwards. Or it means there are demons really in your Pokemon game, which we doubt. Whether or not you believe the tale to be true, you can actually test it out yourself if you're able to get a copy of the original Japanese red or green cartridges, which might cost you a pretty penny nowadays, but hey, actually it'd be really hard to test out if you're like over the age of like 15, 16. You're not gonna hear it, and then, I mean, I'm sure it would be an experience to play the original Japanese games. It'd be really cool to see the differences, but you're probably not gonna force yourself to get ill and then commit suicide from it, so... In at number 3, Pokemon Black. This fictional version of Pokemon Black is said to turn its players into cold-blooded killers. Fun! Not to be mistaken with the actual 2010 Pokemon Black, this one spawned from a creepypasta and was a game that was said to have been salvaged from a flea market in 2005. It begins as Pokemon Red and Blue do, but instead of choosing between 3 starter Pokemon, you get to choose between 4, with the 4th being a Pokemon called Ghost. Now if you select Charmander, Squirtle, or Bulbasaur, your game is exactly the same as it is with any other Red and Blue game. But if you select Ghost, the Pokemon doesn't start at level 5 like the others do. It starts at level 1, and it only has one move titled Curse. Not that that matters though, because almost every single Pokemon who faces Ghost is, I quote, too scared to move. When Curse is used, the screen cuts to black, you hear the cry of the opposing Pokemon, and then the screen will reappear, with the Pokemon having disappeared entirely. Aside from that, everything is normal. But after defeating the Elite Four, the game goes askew again, with text appearing on the screen that reads, "Many years later, ... And then the screen cuts to Lavender Town. Your sprite becomes an old man looking at tombstones in the town, no longer having any Pokemon in your roster, not even Ghost. The game is now empty of people, with only tombstones remaining scattered throughout the land. It's revealed to you then that everyone you cursed with Ghost's curse move was killed by you and your Pokemon. You then come across Ghost once more, in a battle, with your only move being Struggle. which chips down your health until it is almost entirely depleted. Ghost then uses Curse on you and your screen fades to black. Now if you reboot your Game Boy, your saved game is gone. But hey, you can still play it because often referred to as Pokemon Creepy Black, you can download mods to play on emulators that allows you to experience this unsettling version. No word on whether or not it permanently deletes on your computer, so if you know, let us know in those comments below. And at number 2, Snow on Mount Silver. The Snow on Mount Silver creepypasta follows a sister and brother, narrated by the former, who grew up together collecting Pokemon games. Now as they got older, they decided to dabble with hacking some of those games using a Game Shark. But when it failed, the sister, our faithful narrator, gave up on hacking games for the most part. Her brother, on the other hand, became obsessed. One day after returning from a sleepover at her friend's, the sister came home looking for her brother, wanting to trade Pokemon with him after having a particularly hard time with the Elite Four in Pokemon Gold. When she found her brother though, she discovered all of his Pokemon cartridges smashed and damaged on their living room floor, and him sitting on the edge of his bed in his room, his face pale, a hammer in hand, and his Game Boy Advance destroyed. When she went over to give him a hug, he saw her Game Boy Advance in her pocket and screamed, hurtling it across the room and hitting the nearby wall. The sister went over and turned it on to see if it still worked. It did, but when the Pokemon theme began to play out of it, her brother screamed once more, picking up the hammer. He ended up in the hospital in the psych ward for 2 days. Now, during his stay, he asked his sister to get rid of whatever games were left in his room. But when she arrived back home, curiosity got the best of her. She had to see what he had seen, what had made him go manic in this way. She found the Game Shark code that he had last used in his notes, a string of unintelligible numbers and letters with the phrase Easter egg Snow on Mount Silver written next to it. So she tossed in the cheat code into his GBA with Pokemon Silver. Now the opening titles were perfectly normal. It wasn't until she saw the time on the saved game that she knew something was off. It read 999 hours and 99 minutes. Whoa. Eventually a dim map appeared and it looked like static, but as she kept looking, turns out it was actually the Mount Silver map, that static being heavy falling snow. So she began to explore. Her sprite hit an invisible wall, and text appeared that read, "I can't turn back now." Even after using an escape rope, she still couldn't leave the area. More strange dialogue continued to appear over the next several minutes, including the sprite announcing that he was cold, and her brother's Pokemon in his roster were all dying off. At the summit of the mountain, Red was no longer there. Instead, it was Celebi, whose sprite looked mangled. It used a move called Perish Song, and a screech came out of her Game Boy Advance. She was teleported to a cave rather than a Pokemon Center, and all of her Pokemon were now mauled. The trainer on her brother's trainer card was missing a leg. All the Pokemon looked frostbitten. Eventually she came across Red's sprite. A battle began. Each of their Pokemon were barely alive, their sprites mangled, and every time they fainted, rather than the text box stating as such, it said that that Pokemon had died, which is not a thing that can happen in the regular games. Eventually our narrator had come to the conclusion that this sub-level of the mountain was some type of hellscape where all of these deceased Pokemon, her sprite and Red sprite, now lived. Eventually after the battle ended, a now mangled looking Red said the words, "It's over." Text appeared that said, "Use Destiny Bond," and our narrator's screen went white, followed by a painful screech emitting from the Game Boy speakers. Then the screen went black. She tossed the game out, the Game Boy, and the Game Shark. Her and her brother have never been able to play a Pokemon game since, so traumatic experience. But you still can, including an adapted version of this creepypasta. Just give mod for Snow on Mount Silver a Google, and you'll find it. This one is also at GameJolt.com. And finally, at number 1, Hypno's Lullaby. Hypno's Lullaby is one of the more interesting and unique creepypastas on our list. It began as a creepypasta poem in the vein of the Pied Piper, in which the psychic Pokemon Hypno lures children away from their homes using his hypnotism abilities and then feeds on their dreams for all of eternity. Here's a taste of the poem for you. I quote, "Come little children, come with me. Safe and happy you will be. Away from your homes now let us run. With Hypno you'll have so much fun. Oh little children please don't cry. Hypno wouldn't hurt a fly. Be free, be free, be free to play. Come down in my cave with me to stay." It gets darker from there too. The poem began circulating around 2010, and then the same year a YouTuber uploaded an actual song using the poem, which was creepy AF, and scored itself 3 million views. Now you can actually download a fan-made version of the game, which began circulating online around 2013. It's actually a ROM hack of Pokemon Fire Red, and you encounter an evil Hypno who kidnaps children, which actually sounds like a really fun thing to deal with. I mean, like, obviously bad for the children, but exciting gameplay for you.